Hello, and welcome to the Mr. Monster YouTube channel. I'm Mr. Monster. As a reminder, all stories on this channel are created and or written by me. So I hope you enjoy today's story, part 2 of Lost Tape. Part 1 is already on my channel, so feel free to watch that before coming back to this one. Pinewood stagnants will typically only chase persons out of the immediate area, often seeming more territorial than aggressive. However, syrup stagnants are known to chase. The longest distance recorded for your syrup stagnant, before a person was absorbed, was 1 mile. So in conclusion, for the end of Lesson 2 of Tape 2, for pinewood stagnants escape without coming into close proximity with the stagnant, and burn affected area. For syrup stagnants, the same principle applies. However, to increase your chances of survival, hiding intermittently when running away will increase your chances of survival. An image of a pine cone and a bottle of syrup were now on the screen. Good luck, viewer, and remember, if you smell either of these, and are in an area where the air is thick, run. Neither Chrissy nor Jason moved. They kept their heads stuck facing forward. "Is there a window in this room?" Jason asked. Chrissy thought for a moment, then said, yes. Jason's mind was stressed, but that made his thoughts more clear and precise. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to smash the glass with my heavy metal flashlight, and we will jump out the window. My townhouse is only about a mile away. We're going to make a break for it, stopping in some spots to hide along the way." Chrissy didn't argue or acknowledge his statement. She sounded slightly hysterical when she said, "If it could have gotten us this whole time, then why hasn't it killed us already?" Jason thought for a moment, then said, "I don't know. Maybe the first tape had the answer to that, but right now we need to focus. Okay, Chrissy?" No response came. A chill went down Jason's spine. He was so tempted to turn his head, but he resisted. "Chrissy! Chrissy!" Jason's willpower faltered. The temptation that would possibly bring him to his certain death won the battle. He turned his head and saw something he would have preferred he had never seen. Chrissy was also staring at it. Standing next to Chrissy was a stagnant. The smell of syrup was so incredibly strong now. It was as if Jason were somehow in a maple tree itself. The creature had 4 legs and 8 arms. Its face was unlike anything Jason had ever seen or imagined. It was as if you took a man's face and made the jaw stretchy. It had hundreds of teeth, sharp, grating teeth. The bottom of its horrible mouth was dangling halfway down its body. Its eyes were entirely red. Its skin was gray all over, and every limb that it had was mismatched, leaving a very disjointed, terrifying image. Jason noticed on one of the arms it had a bracelet. The bracelet was metal and engraved. In it was one name, Max. Some of the arms must have been Max's parents as well, because one looked like it had the arm of a middle-aged woman, and the other, a little bit more muscular, looked like that of a middle-aged man. The skin on the older person's arms were looser than the rest of the arms and looked more wrinkly. The stagnant was staring at the television. It looked at the television the same way a dog looks at one, with curiosity and confusion. "Chrissy, now!" Jason yelled. As soon as he moved, the creature snapped its head at him. Jason hurled the flashlight through the window while grabbing Chrissy's wrist with his other hand. The window broke with a crash. The two leapt over the back of the couch as Jason felt something grab his jacket. His jacket was still damp enough from the rain to make sure the creature's grip faltered, however. It felt like Jason's body was moving before his mind had time to catch up, like an athlete reacting out of instinct. His hands were gripping Chrissy's waist as she braced to be thrown out of the window. He followed quickly after she was on the ground. The stagnant was outside with them before Jason even had time to get up from his knee. Chrissy was already running. Jason caught up as quickly as he could, then sped across the street towards the bus shelter. Jason knew that behind it was a small alleyway, that there was a trash bin they could hide in. When they got to the street, the monster grabbed them both by the necks. Jason knew it was pointless to kick and punch, but he tried to anyway. And then, all of a sudden, boom! A car, most likely going too fast in the rain, crashed into the beast, causing it to loosen its grip just enough for the man and the woman to get away. Jason looked over at Chrissy, and she looked to be okay. The two ran into the alleyway behind the bus shelter, and Jason directed Chrissy to the large green metal trash bin. They both jumped in. The bin smelled nothing like syrup, and much more like seafood. They heard the Stagnant run fast towards them. Then the creature slowed as it realized it had lost them. Eventually, after a long, excruciating moment, the beast slowly turned around and went down to the end of the alleyway, where it stopped and waited. It wouldn't ignore the bin for long, so Jason and Chrissy took this moment with the creature's back turned to run all the way down the alleyway. And after they did, the monster turned and looked down the poorly lit alleyway. Jason and Chrissy ran down the nearest street and turned into a small but busy Italian restaurant. The beast did not pause. It slammed through the glass in the front and began grabbing nearby persons. The first victim was a young girl. She looked to be the youngest in the entire establishment. It ripped off her arms with ease and jammed them into its side. Then it ripped off her legs, quickly shoving them in between the legs it had already had. The young girl and her parents watched on in horror as the girl's body shot out blood from where all the limbs had been attached. The monster didn't stop. It simply threw the crying girl on the ground and proceeded to grab more and more people. Jason saw a candle on the table closest to him and Chrissy. He threw it at the monster and it recoiled from the flames, stinging momentarily. But then the monster continued to grab more people, ripping off their limbs. Jason now noticed that the old limbs it had were falling off and being replaced by the new ones from the horrified customers. Many people began to run down the street. The monster was making quick work of everyone who remained, now starting to just add limbs instead of replacing them. Jason allowed the violence of the scene to send him into a pseudo-catatonic shock. He was tired of running. Seeing this scene made it all feel so inevitable. Chrissy tried grabbing his arm, but his body was a lead weight. Smack! Chrissy had slapped him across the face. Jason, we have to move! The simple act took Jason out of his haze. He once again took her hand in his, and they both began to sprint. The two escaped through the kitchen and into the back alleyway. The cooks had also done this and were holding kitchen knives or pots and pans. Anything that could be used as a weapon. One of the male cooks slipped and fell, sending the knife through his neck, killing him instantly with a giant spray of blood. The creature must have started to chase the people on the main street, because Jason heard its footsteps slamming on the pavement on the other side of the building. It must have gathered many legs by this point, because it sounded like a stampede. Through extremely heavy breathing, Jason was able to get out. We just have to continue to the next street and turn right. They got to the end of the alleyway that was covered with broken bottles and cigarette butts. They quickly pivoted to the right. Jason felt a pop in his knee and a huge rush of pain slammed into him. He ignored it as best he could and powered through. He could live with a messed up knee, much better than the alternative if they stopped. As they crossed the street, the Stagnant saw them. Jason didn't have to see the beast to know. Jason felt it. They sprinted and sprinted as hard as they could, the stampede following behind them. To say Jason's cardiovascular limits were being tested would be an understatement. The two got to Jason's door, and instead of trying to unlock it, Jason slammed his full body against it with all of his weight, and the door broke. Judging by the pain in his shoulder, Jason suspected the door wasn't the only thing that broke. Chrissy followed Jason into the house, and they immediately opened a door to a flight of stairs which led them down. In the basement of the townhouse, there was a small bathroom with a freestanding bathtub. Jason got both Chrissy and himself in the bathroom and slammed the door, locking it behind them. "Sit down and tuck your head between your knees," Chrissy said. Jason did it without a second thought. Then Chrissy flipped the bathtub on its side and sat down as well. She then flipped the bathtub the rest of the way over, covering her and Jason, their heads touching. The space was small, but luckily there were gaps of uneven ground where the tub was touching the floor, meaning the two would have airflow. They were like this for a few seconds before they heard a crash upstairs. Chrissy began to pray to a god she didn't believe in, while Jason prayed to anything that would listen. The stampede upstairs was loud and violent. Sounds of glass being destroyed, wood beams being knocked over would forever echo in Chrissy's mind. Judging by the sounds, the house was collapsing as the monster furiously sought them out. Jason and Chrissy felt debris beginning to hit the tub and that they were hiding under, further locking them into their position on the floor. Eventually, the sounds of destruction ceased, and the vibration of the stampede grew further and further away. Now that the adrenaline was starting to wear off, Jason's pain skyrocketed. He didn't say anything to Chrissy, however. She was probably just as beat up as he was, he presumed. The only external thing that showed his pain was his jagged breaths. After a long while, Jason pulled out his phone to check the time. It was late. But he supposed that didn't really mean anything to him, since he didn't know when all this madness started anyways. The light of the phone illuminated a large amount of dust that had collected in the small space. Chrissy coughed a little, and although he couldn't see Chrissy, with his head stuck between his knees, he noticed a puddle of blood forming from her direction. "You're bleeding," Jason said through harsh breaths. "I just cut my hand on the rim of the bathtub," she said with a scratchy, strained voice. A few more hours went by with the pain of both Chrissy and Jason increasing due to the cramped conditions they found themselves in. Jason was glad to see that the puddle of blood was no longer increasing in size. Chrissy had stopped bleeding. Eventually, they heard sirens. A group of firefighters were the ones to discover them with the help of a bloodhound that located them in the rubble. Both Chrissy and Jason were too shell-shocked to speak. All their energy was gone, bled from them like a pig hanging in a slaughterhouse. Neither of them were able to untuck their heads from in between their knees without the help of the firefighters. Jason and Chrissy were both taken to the local hospital, which wasn't so local considering it was an hour away. Chrissy was released before Jason, but she came back every day to check on him. Jason and Chrissy tried telling the truth for a few days, but they were told that if they kept speaking about it, they'd be thrown in the psych ward. So they meshed with the official narrative eventually. A freak storm brought in a strange tornado. But they both knew the truth that they only had to share between each other. Jason and Chrissy were the only survivors of the incident. Everyone else who witnessed the Stagnant was killed. After Jason was released from the hospital, he went to live with Chrissy. Considering his house was destroyed in the incident, she figured it was the least she could do. Not too long later, they began to date, and eventually got married years later. Their trauma brought them together, but their friendship made it stick. One day, 10 years after the initial incident, Jason woke up from a horrible dream in bed. It was the nightmare of that night. And then Jason smelled something. It smelled like syrup. Sickly, sweet syrup. He froze. Not again. Not again. "Hey, Jason, I'm making waffles. Do you want any syrup on yours?" "Not funny, Chrissy." Jason heard his wife laugh from the room over. But maybe it was about time they started joking about the trauma. Thank you all for listening to part 2 of The Lost Tape here on my Mr. Monster YouTube channel. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, please hit the like button. I thank you for listening this long, and if you guys have any recommendations or critiques, please leave them in the comments below. I do read them. Also, if you enjoy this style of content, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you get notified when new videos come out. My regimen for the foreseeable future is to release a video at 4 o'clock on Friday, 9 o'clock on Saturday, and 9 o'clock on Sundays. So, as always, that is going to be it for me today, and I am Mr. Monster, and I am out.